This Shabbos we read from an additional Sefer Torah. We read what's called Parshas Parah, which is the beginning of Parshas Chukas in the book of Bamidbar, which teaches all of the people how to purify themselves after having come in contact with the dead. We are taught by our sages that in reality, this was one of the very first mitzvahs that the Jewish people received, all the way back when they were in a place called Mara, where when they first left Egypt, they were given a few individual mitzvot, Shabbos, Parah Aduma, just very, very scant mitzvot. But the mitzvah doesn't appear in the text of the Torah until the very end of Parshas Bamidbar. And the reason is because it became most relevant as they were about to enter into Eretz Yisrael and encounter warfare, because that's where you encounter death the most. Why do we read it right before Pesach? Sorry, I don't mean to scare you, but it's like, it's just a couple of weeks, what is it, 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks before Pesach? Okay? 3.5 weeks before Pesach. Why? So why are we reading it now? Because in temple times, it was necessary to remind people already well in advance in Adar that you're not going to be able to offer your paschal sacrifice if you're in a state of tumah because you've come in contact with the dead. So this is one of the ways for you to prepare for Pesach. Make sure, review this law, and make sure you don't need the ashes of the red heifer to be sprinkled on you. And if you do, take care of it now because it's a protracted process. It takes at least a week in order for you to get everything in order. When we look at the first words of the Parsha, it says, Zos Chukas HaTorah. This is the statute of the Torah. Our sages have a tradition that the word chok or chukah refers to a mitzvah whose reason is not readily apparent. And certainly that applies to Parah Aduma, which is known as the quintessential chok, the one mitzvah where the more we think about it, the more it defies logic. Part of the difficulty in understanding the Parah Aduma is that it has certain opposite features to it. The person who prepares the ashes of the Parah Aduma himself becomes tamei when the ashes themselves are supposed to purify. It's also very obscure how this idea works about how you're supposed to purify someone by scattering ashes, which represents death, if anything, and that purifies them. So that's the chukah part. We take a look at Rashi, and Rashi says, Zos chukas haTorah. This is the statute. And Rashi says the Torah is emphatic in its language, Lefisha hasatan v'umot ha'olam monin et Yisrael lomar. Because both the Satan and the other nations of the world criticize Israel, saying as follows, Ma mitzvah hazot, u'matam yeshba. What is this mitzvah? What possible reason, what possible logic lies behind it? Lefichach kosav ba chukah. And that's why the word chukah is used to describe a mitzvah which doesn't have an apparent reason. Because to be chok, to be chokek something, is to engrave or embed into something else. Basically, God is saying, I need to drive this into you. I need to embed this mitzvah into you in order to reinforce it. Why? It is my divine decree, and therefore you have no right to start thinking critically about it. In other words, to start thinking, well, this doesn't make any sense. Therefore, Hashem says, it's a chukah. I'm driving it into you. Don't challenge it. Don't critique it. I know what I'm doing. It may not make sense to you, but it makes sense to me. And this is especially vexing when we know that both the Satan, whatever that means, and the Umot HaOlam and the other nations of the world take us to task for doing nonsensical things. Any man who travels is aware of this sensation of feeling that sense of I'm being criticized or I'm being ridiculed by people right now. Because any man who has to travel invariably will have to over the course of his travels, put on his tefillin in the airport. And when you put on your tefillin in the airport, and you see sometimes the stares and glares of people who are just not mean-spirited, but just have no idea what you're doing because they've never seen a Jew put on tefillin before, or they look at it and say, what in the world is this person doing? And I hope he's not strapping a bomb to himself, right? Or anything else that they may be thinking. So then you automatically feel that sense of, I know that this is something that if other people see me do it, they're going to think I'm nuts. And that's what this Rashi is saying. And Hashem is saying, that's why I call it a chukah. That's why I call it a statute. It's something that I need to drive into you, because there's a natural reaction of saying, I know that others are going to be critical of it since it seems ridiculous, but Hashem says you got to do it anyway. Now, here's the problem. I want to present you with an inherent contradiction to this idea. In Parshas Va'eschanan, there is a pasuk that seems to tell us the exact opposite, that when other nations see us do the chukim, they will admire us tremendously. If you take a look at pasuk in source number 3, the Torah says, "Ushmartem va'asisem," you shall observe and do the mitzvot, ki hi chochmaschem uvinaschem le'einei ha'amim, because it is, after all, your entire wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the nations. Asher yishmu'un eis kol hachukim ha'ela, because they will hear about all of these chukim. Notice how the Torah deliberately uses the word chukim here. The Amiru, rak am chacham v'navon hagoy hagadol hazeh. And they will say, wow, only, or verily, this is a wise and discerning people. So, do you see the apparent contradiction? Does anyone see the contradiction here? What's the contradiction, Michelle?
The contradiction is we just saw in Parsha, in Rashi's commentary, that you're going to be, that the Umara Alam and the Satan, whoever that is going to say, wow, these people are nuts. They're observing chukim that don't, this paradigm that doesn't make any sense. While we see in Parshat the exact opposite, that these chukim are going to be used to show the Umar love. They're going to see, wow, these people are chacham and avon. They're willing to do the chukim that don't have apparent reasons. They're going to be praised for it.
They'll be filled with tremendous admiration, right? Right. So, how do we reconcile? Very, very well said. How do we reconcile this? How do we reconcile this apparent contradiction? Any suggestions?
Well, both will happen. Some will criticize, some will be amazed. They both exist.
Okay. But it sounds, it does, that's possible, but it just seems that, why does the Torah have to use the word chukim when it talks about the admiration of the other nations? Wouldn't you have expected the Torah to say, the other nations will admire you when you observe the mitzvot in general? Why specifically the chukim, the ones that don't have a reason? Yeah.
Well, when it says Zos Chukas HaTorah, can't you also extrapolate from that you could say the whole Torah is really a hope? And although we try to understand reasons for the mitzvos, our understanding is limited. And at the end of the day, sometimes you reach a brick wall and you say, no matter how much I learn about this, I still can't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. And at that time, you have to accept it as a hope. And when it says, Lefisha HaSatan, I feel like that's the Satan inside each one of us saying, why are you doing this? This is crazy. But at the end of the day, you do it because Hashem told you to.
Very good. Very good. Okay, so how do you reconcile that with the pasuk in Va'eschanan?
I think that's maybe in the time of Mashiach it's talking about, that when everything becomes clear to everyone.
Really? You think it's only in the future?
I'm just giving it a possible.
Okay. But that's a sad reflection. You're basically saying that in our world today, no one's going to admire the Jews. Linda?
Isn't it just more, I would say it's a lack of, on our part as human beings, because there must be a reason that we don't understand, but we're doing it because we just have the faith. So if you believe and you have the faith, even other people that will see it, they might end up respecting you because they don't understand it just like we don't understand it, but it's like, wow, they just have so strong faith that they're doing it anyway. And I think that's...
So they'll admire the fact that we do these things on faith.
Right.
Okay. So they may perhaps say, it's all mumbo jumbo to me. I don't get it. Doesn't make any sense. But at least I admire people who are willing to go out on a limb for their beliefs. Perhaps that's one way of looking at it. Let me share with you a couple of thoughts. We'll get to the Alshich in just a moment, but as an introduction to the Alshich, I saw a more contemporary commentary provide us with the following mashal, the following parable. This is part of a much larger commentary in the Sefer called Tiferes Moshe. But he writes, Umatir et hasafek hazeh b'mashal. We can answer this question that we've just asked, the contradiction, with a mashal. Lama hadavar domeh, li'ish echad mit'asek b'melechet harefu'ah. A person is engaged in medicine. He's a doctor, and he heals people. V'hu rofei pa'amim yirapeyes hacholim al pi sifrei harefu'ah, v'lif'amim yirapei b'dvarim zarim b'lechashim v'samim asher lo noda shemam v'zichram, asher lo se'arum mechabrei sifrei harefu'ah, v'lo yigzerem hekesh hativ'i. So you have this fellow. He practices dual medicine. We find this a lot I've seen this even in Canada, where you have some doctors who are medically licensed because they went to medical school, an excellent medical school here in Canada or the U.S., but they also acknowledge that there's something to Eastern medicine as well. So they will go the normal pathway, but then they will also at times take the Eastern path when they feel that there's nothing that Western medicine has to offer. And sometimes the Eastern medicine to a Western doctor looks like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, right? Because it's none of this stuff, or what's that thing where they put a little something in a sugar pellet? Homeopathy?
Placebo.
No. Homeopathy, right? Homeopathic medicine. Where the doctors today, they look at homeopathic medicine and they say it's ridiculous. But we have a guy in our shul who practices dentistry that way with homeopathy. It's really quite interesting. And so the doctors look at him and they say he's meshuggah, right? But he gets results. So he uses the conventional methods, and he also uses the unconventional methods, even things that were never recorded in the medical books. And then he says, Uvinodah hadavar el harofim hamumchim uvikiyim harbei bechochmat harefuah yachshavu la'ish hazeh lepeti v'sachal. When the other doctors who are very professional and very learned see what this guy is doing, they think he's an idiot for using this quackery to prescribe certain things and certain, regimens that are not known to Western medicine. Aval behemshech hazman bir'otam godel chochmato v'rov binato, asher yachol lerapeh et hacholim, asher kol harofim hagdolim v'hamumchim lo matzu terufa lemichtam, ve'amru no'ash alehem ki lo yizrach lehem orach hayim yoter. But when they see that this guy is able to treat people that everyone else in the medical community has given up on, everyone else has said this patient is not going to make it. There is nothing that we can do for them. And this guy goes ahead and treats them. V'hu haya mirapei otam b'samanim zarim b'lechashot zarot v'shuv zarach alehem orach hayim. So when they see that he's getting the results that they never thought were possible, they have to change their tune. They have to acknowledge, finally, that based on the results you're getting, we can't explain it. We thought it was quackery, but we can't argue with the results. Now, how does this reflect back on our discussion about the way that the world will look at the chukim? Now let's take a look at the Alshich HaKadosh. So he asks the question, he says, V'shema tomru ki iksha alechem inyan ha-chukim, al davar ha'umot hamonim et Yisrael b'omram ki hem dvarim chaserei tam, kamo she'amru zal al Parah aduma, So first he asks the question that we've just asked, which is, how can you tell me that the world will look at the chukim that we're doing and admire us and say how wise and understanding we are, when these are the very mitzvahs that the nations criticize us and ridicule us for? Lazeh amar al yera ze be'einechem ki im ushmartem et hachukim ki adarabah hi chochmatchem. Hashem says, don't be concerned about what they're going to say. You know why? Because asher yishmu et kol hachukim ha'eleh, because when they hear about the chukim that you're doing, and you couple that with kigam sheyiru hadvarim zarim be'eineihem, lo yomru ki lo mechachma anachnu osim otam ki adarabah yomru rak am chacham v'navon osei hachukim ha'eleh. They will be forced to conclude there must be something to what we're doing. You know why? Ki yomeru ma zeh sheyisrael na'anim b'chol karam v'lo keinheim. Because it's based on the very next pasuk in Parshas Vo'eschanan. Ki mi goy gadol asher lo elokim kerovim elav kashem elokeinu b'chol kareinu elav. What other nation has God at their beck and call like the Jewish people? What other nation can arise from the ashes of the Shoah and make their own state? What other nation can have a war in 6 days and defeat 7 enemies that are trying to attack them, have more air power, have more firepower, have more soldiers, have more artillery, and still be able to defeat them? That's what the Torah is saying. We think it's ridiculous, this Parah Aduma, and Shatnez, and Tzitzis, and all the other things, and Kashrus, and all of the other things that you're doing. We don't understand it, but here's what we do note. What we do note is looking at the history of the Jewish people and the Jews who were living in front of us in the 21st century. There is no other nation like the Jews in the world. And so there must be something to what you're doing. There's got to be something to it. So don't be embarrassed when you put on your tefillin in the airport. Because when you identify as a Jew, they may look at you with condescension because they see, oh, what a provincial thing that this Jew is doing. But then they'll realize this person is the key to Jewish survival, and the survival of the Jews is a miracle greater than any other nation's survival. The world has to acknowledge that. They don't have to acknowledge the veracity of any particular mitzvah that we do, but they do have to acknowledge that there's something unique about the Jewish people. We've survived it all, and will continue to survive. And that's one of the reasons why some of them hate us so much. They can't stand it that we're surviving so much, and that we're not only surviving, but we're flourishing. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. It can't be because of the mishpatim that we practice, because of the civil laws that we practice, because we do the civil laws too. It's got to be because there's something mystical and supernatural that defies rational explanation. Just like that doctor that's practicing Chinese medicine, it looks like quackery, but you can't deny the results. The results is that he's healing patients. The results are the Jewish people are thriving. And there's got to be a reason for it. And if the reason is not because of the rational things the Jews are doing, there's got to be something there. Now, sometimes we lose sight of that as well. Sometimes we lose sight of the fact that there's something unusual about Klal Yisrael, and does not lie in our culture, because we come from so many different cultures. It does not lie in any other external factor other than our religious nature, the religious fabric of the Jewish people. The great mistakes that great thinkers made in trying to found the state, trying to uncouple religion from the state, they realized, today everyone realizes, that's even secular Jews realize, that you can't separate religion from the Jewish people. And that's why there's so many movements afoot now to reintroduce Tanakh education into secular Israeli schools, because they realize the key to the survival of the Jewish people is the Torah and nothing else. So that's what the Alshich is saying. It's not a contradiction. It's that the key to our survival as the Jews, when they see us thriving, and by the way, what you also see from here is that when we, and I think some of you may have pointed this out, when we act with confidence, the world will not be critical of us. It's only when we act with uncertainty and our own sense of doubt about whether these things are worthwhile or not, that's when the world begins to criticize. And I think that's also a reason why it starts off, Rashi starts off with Shah Satan. It's the Satan who starts it. When the Satan inside of us, like Mrs. Sochachevsky said, when the Satan inside of us starts raising questions about how embarrassing this must look, then the Umot HaOlam chime in as well. Right? But if we were to have a sense of confidence that this is the key to the survival of our people, I know it doesn't make sense. I don't understand how a paraduma works. But Hashem says that there are certain metaphysical components to this universe that are totally invisible to us, but are nonetheless no less real than anything that is visible to us. There's nothing mysterious about it. The Sefer Binyan Shlomo, which we're not going to read today, basically says a similar idea. But he adds one little kinach to it, which I wanted to share with you outside in the last few minutes. He writes as follows. He says, part of the criticism that the rest of the world has to the Jewish people when they see us doing certain practices is we claim that these mitzvahs that we do, like kashrus and not wearing shatnez and things like that, not mixing milk and meat, granted they are chukim, but they're beneficial to the person who does the mitzvah. And so then they say, well, that's ridiculous. I eat pig, and there's nothing wrong with me. I wear wool and linen together. I mix milk and meat together, and I'm perfectly fine. So you see, my health is not affected by this, and my well-being is not affected by this. So that's why the mitzvahs are ridiculous. That's why the chukim are ridiculous, yes?
You're just not going to have Jewish grandchildren.
What?
You're just not going to have Jewish grandchildren.
No, it's the other nations are saying this. The other nations look at us and they say, if you're telling me that a chok is logical and it's beneficial, then why is it only the Jews who have to do it and non-Jews don't have to do it? I, as a non-Jew, don't practice this mitzvah, and I seem to be perfectly fine. So where's the logic in it? That's the criticism.
They're not perfectly fine, though. They have a lot of gut problems. I mean, it's not a good chemical combination.
Show me Jews without gut problems.
Well, they have a Jew from bad eating.
Okay, so but you can't blame that on the chazer. You can blame it on bad eating. You blame it on
mixing milk with meat is a bad chemical combination
Okay.
in your gut. So why, we create our own gut problems.
But you look. At the end of the day, a Jew can also, as long as he doesn't cook the meat and milk together, he can eat. He can eat ice cream and then right afterwards have a corned beef sandwich. So he's not going to have problems with his gut. That's not the issue. The issue is that there's something metaphysical about it. So they're saying even if there is something metaphysical about it, then why shouldn't it apply to all people? And so what's the correct response? The correct response is that the Jewish people are inherently different on a metaphysical plane, like Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had taught us before. Now, this is not a popular answer. There are some people, perhaps even the Rambam, would not agree with this approach. But Rabbi Yehuda Halevi very much is of the approach that the metaphysics of mitzvot are real. But just like there are certain people who are sensitive to certain foods and other people are not, the Jewish people are much more sensitive because of our delicate stomachs or delicate metaphysics. We're much more intolerant of milk and meat together than the other nations. But not only are we more delicate or more sensitive to it, but the very metaphysical makeup of us is manifest on a national level because of the wisdom and the ingenuity of the people. In other words, this particular commentary says, the nations will look upon us and say, if they look at the individual mitzvah, they'll say, what differences should there be between a Jew and a non-Jew? And that's why we don't understand why this mitzvah makes any sense, because it only applies to Jews and not to non-Jews. But then, in Parshas Va'eschanan, when they look at the ingenuity of the Jewish people, when they look at the startup nation, and they see this incredible makeup of an incredible people, they'll say, okay, now I get it. Now I understand why certain things are germane specifically to the Jewish people. There's something within them that makes them different, and that's why the mitzvah now makes sense, that it should only apply to the Jew and not to the non-Jew. So, like he says, Sha'al yedei asiyat ha-mitzvah tizku el ha-chochma, that when you do the mitzvah and you refrain from ingesting or participating in certain things, it only adds to the superior fabric of your peoplehood. And that's what will cause the sort of the discernment and understanding of the other nations when they see that there actually is a difference. Yes?
If you do a mitzvah, it's not only helping you, it's helping the entire Jewish people? Whatever mitzvah
When a person does a mitzvah, they're helping the entire world. They're actually making a difference in the entire world. This is just a small fragment of that it affects the national nature of the Jewish people. But the truth is, we affect the whole cosmic fabric, according to Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, whenever we do a mitzvah. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that it's occurred to me in this era of, post-Harvey Weinstein era, Orthodox Jews are not so crazy. We don't fall into the problems that have happened over there. We dress modestly, we don't mix, we don't touch, and there are good reasons for that. We don't have those problems.
Right.
Not so crazy.
And those aren't even chukim.
Yeah.
Right? But your point is well taken. We shouldn't be concerned about the way other people look at us, because the society outside of us is not so healthy.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at someone who eats badly and who lives life badly, and they're the ones that are critical of you, you shouldn't really take it so much to heart. Point well taken. Michelle.
I do have a question about, how many parot adumot were there? And how, I did just somebody that sometimes they didn't always get the right parah to create the proper ash and mix with the different things. How often did it happen?
It was rare. I think there's a medrash that says that there have been 7 in all of history. And that you always have to take the original paraduma ash from Moshe Rabbeinu and mix it in with every subsequent paraduma.
So
How that's going to work when
Right.
Mashiach comes, I don't know.
I have a question, were there people that really could never participate in the Korban Pesach because of that?
Sure. And that's why the Torah tells us that there is something called Pesach Sheni,
Yeah.
precisely for those people who are tamei and can't bring the Korban Pesach. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.